Welcome to A Conversation with History. I'm Harry Kreisler of the Institute of International Studies. Our guest today is Ernst Haas, who is the Robeson Research Professor of Political Science at UC Berkeley, where he has taught for 49 years. He is the author of numerous books, including most recently Nationalism, Liberalism, and Progress, When Knowledge is Power, and in an earlier period, Beyond the Nation State and the Uniting of Europe. Ernie, welcome to our program.
Glad to be here.
Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Frankfurt, Germany, and I lived there until age 14.
And how did your parents shape your character, looking back in retrospect?
Oh, how did my parents shape my character? I'm not sure they did, but they tried. And they shaped my character in the sense that they made me work pretty hard and rewarded me for being myself.
And was it a family in which there was a lot of reading, a lot of books around?
Yes, yes.
And did you read a lot when you were young?
I read a great deal.
What sorts of things did you read?
Oh, adventure stories, murder mysteries, a little bit of classical Greek myths, standard German drama, plays.
And did you decide you wanted to go into the academy at a young age, or did that come later?
That came as I was discharged from the Army.
We'll get into that in a minute, but let's finish up here. So you were growing up at the time that the Nazi Party was rising to power and achieving power in Germany.
Correct.
And what was that like to be
unpleasant?
Unpleasant. And in what ways was it unpleasant?
Well, I would get beaten up on my way to school every day. Mm-hmm. You know, it wasn't fun being Jewish in Germany in those days, and it affected my family directly in the sense that my father got fired.
And your father? Yeah, your father was a.
My father was a curator in a natural history museum, which was technically a civil service position, which under Nazi racial laws, Jews were not eligible for. So he got fired.
So, and this experience of discrimination and so on was an everyday reality from the time the Nazis came to power?
It was an everyday reality from 1933 on.
Mm-hmm. And within your family, was there a sense of what the Nazis were up to before they came to power and when they were just a minor political party?
I don't remember that, to be truthful. My family was not politically sophisticated, and I would be surprised if they had been really sensitive to what was going on.
And in school, were you literally ostracized in the classroom also?
Depended on the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
When I was going to the regular public school, the teacher I was mostly involved with was a social democrat. He was, of course, an opponent of the regime, and he went out of his way to be nice to me. Mm-hmm. But that was not true of all teachers. It depended on their political leanings. Mm-hmm. However, it was unsafe during recess to go out in the yard, mm-hmm. because you'd wind up bloody by the end of the recess. So after 4th grade, I decided I'd had enough of this and went to a Jewish parochial school instead.
Mm-hmm. So you actually did religious studies at the school, or just secular studies?
It was secular studies, but I mean, there was a little bit of religion, which those of us who were secularly minded paid no attention to. Much to the disgust of the teachers, I might say.
So when did your family start planning to immigrate, and then when did they finally immigrate, and how old were you then?
I was 14, they immigrated in 1938, and they started to make plans to immigrate in 36. And my father tried out a couple of jobs before we came to this country, which didn't work out.
Tried out the jobs, in other words,
in
the facility?
Brazil.
Oh, in Brazil.
In Brazil.
I see. Right. So he actually left the family.
Yeah.
Yeah, he left the family. And what were there difficulty in getting a visa to the United States?
No. At that time, there were no difficulties.
And were you helped by the fact of what his profession was?
I don't think so. I think we were helped by the fact that we had wealthy relatives who vouched for us in this country.
So what is the long-term impact of an experience like that for a young person?
I hate to generalize. I'll tell you what the impact on me was. It created a mindset in me at a relatively early age, which made me extremely conscious of what nowadays we call nationalism. I didn't have the label available then. And made me desirous of living someplace where the kind of nationalism that prevailed was different from the type that I encountered in Nazi Germany.
And a kind that would allow tolerance of different people.
Exactly.
As opposed to what you had experienced.
Exactly.
So you immigrate to the United States, and then what is it like? You had to learn a new language. I guess you did not know English, or did you?
I
know
knew
something?
a little English. I could make myself understood, but I couldn't understand what people were saying to me. So my parents enrolled me in high school. I was a freshman in Hyde Park High in Chicago, and the first semester was kind of rough because I didn't quite understand what was going on. But by the second semester, I'd learned enough English, so I did know what was going on.
And you did well in school, I assume?
Sure.
And did you have teachers who mentored you that helped you in this transition?
No, I did not. I had teachers who were extremely sympathetic in the sense that they saw something or other in me and consequently pushed the kind of work at me from which I profited. But I can't say that they went out of their way to try to make me assimilate faster. No.
Now, and then as an undergraduate, you went to Chicago, or? For
1 year, and then I got drafted. And after the war, I didn't go back to Chicago. I went to Columbia and got my BA there. And then went on and did graduate work there.
Now, I guess that your sense of the importance of nationalism was increased. Your interest in that problem by actually the coming of the war and your serving in the service. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I was fortunate I did a number of things in the Army, but for the most part, I studied Japanese. And that turned out to be a wonderful experience because the kind of courses we had were not merely language courses, but they included a lot of history and culture. And consequently, those years were not wasted, educationally speaking, for me.
And you were in intelligence, and what sort of documents did you study, or communications?
Army manuals.
I see. You mean Japanese Army manuals?
Japanese Army manuals.
To explain how they would behave in particular situations?
No, how weapons worked.
Oh, how weapons worked. I see. Okay. So you finish the service, and any particular lesson you learned from that? I mean, you've already had this. Yeah.
How to manipulate a bureaucracy. That's what I learned.
Okay. So
it came in very good stead, I assure you.
Yeah. And the Army was the paragon example of how to do that.
Precisely.
That's right. So you came back. You went on to Columbia and got a BA in political science.
Yes.
In political science, and then you went on to graduate school.
Right.
And was at this point now it almost inevitable that you would go into international relations, the field of international relations?
I think that part was inevitable. Whether it would be under the auspices of political science as a discipline, as opposed to history or as opposed to sociology, that was not preordained. And it was kind of accidental.
And in what sense?
Well, it wasn't a clearly formulated decision on my part to go into political science rather than into sociology, rather than history. It just sort of happened that way. The courses came at the right time.
And you took and any particular teacher there that really impressed you at Columbia who worked in this field?
Just one of the, I guess, dozen people I, so to speak, studied with. One stood out. He was another German refugee, former Social Democratic apparatchik. His name was Neumann, and he taught comparative politics.
And what was the? How do you explain the rapport with him? Did he?
There wasn't any special rapport with him.
He just was good. His course was good.
Right.
Did he
didn't know me from Adam.
Yeah. And what did he teach you, or what was the field? Just international relations theory?
No, he didn't teach. Nobody taught me international relations theory. What did he teach? He taught modern Germany.
Modern Germany. And so that actually must have resonated with you,
Yes.
trying to kind of
Yes.
understand what had happened.
No, that's exactly it.
I wanted to ask you about your experience in Germany. How secular, I know you're Jewish, how secular was your family, and how committed were they to their Jewish identity?
My mother was very committed, my father less so.
And how did that impinge on the kinds of interests you developed?
I can't say that it did.
So you graduate, you get your PhD from Columbia, and then how in heaven's name did you wind up in Berkeley?
Well, the short answer is I don't know. But I can tell you that at that particular time, this is 1951, my generation of war veterans who had gone to graduate school, they all finished more or less at the same time. So there were hundreds of thousands, I'm exaggerating, there were a lot of us on the market at the same time. I applied to, I think, 60 schools. And I got one response. That was from Berkeley.
And they offered you a position.
They offered me a position without interviewing me. In those days, I didn't interview applicants.
I see. Now, I remember you're saying that you and your wife, who also was from Germany, correct?
Yes, correct.
And you met here in this country?
We met in Chicago.
Okay. That you and she had decided that you wanted to go west,
That is
basically.
true.
And why was that? Just you wanted
Because
to
you're sick of New York, that's why.
I see. And so you lucked out in a sense that Berkeley answered your letter.
It was sheer luck.
Did you?
We didn't know where Berkeley was, to be truthful.
Yeah.
We got to L.A., we asked somebody, where's Berkeley?
I see. And they said north. They
Yeah,
said
right.
north. Your father was a scientist. You
Yeah.
chose social science. What do you think is the difference between being a social scientist and being a scientist? Is there a comparison there worth talking about?
Oh, there's a comparison worth talking about, but it's a comparison which social scientists find, on the whole, depressing. They tend to compare themselves to the extremely successful sciences, particularly physics, to a lesser degree biology, but that's going to change pretty soon, I think. And biology is going to become the exemplar against which the social sciences are going to be found to be wanting. There has been, for the last 50 years roughly, a dominant trend in most social sciences to try to work as closely to what social scientists understand natural scientists to be about, to emulate them. The emulation is, at best, fragmentarily successful. Usually it's unsuccessful, which causes a great deal of soul-searching among social scientists. What are we doing wrong? How come we're not as successful as natural scientists? Do you want me to go on with this?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
To which my response has become, it wasn't always that, my response has become that the comparison is very unfair. That the natural sciences are a great deal easier to be successful in than is true in the social sciences.
And why is that?
There are many reasons, but the simplest reason is this. In the social sciences, the things we study, that is to say human beings, they don't stand still, they talk back to the people who study them. Molecules don't talk back. Cells don't talk back.
And they also are influenced by what you write.
They are sometimes influenced, sometimes influenced by what we write, yes.
That's the ideal thing. You chose social science, and then in particular you chose political science. What is it about politics that makes it a unique phenomena worthy of special study?
Again, I don't want to give a general answer because I don't think there is any. But my personal answer is that politics among the social sciences, to me, initially, was more attractive because it allowed for the study of how people choose to change things. Right? Sociology, that's not precluded in sociology. You can do that in sociology too. But most sociologists don't do that. They study why things are the way they are. Okay, that's fine. That has to be done. Political scientists do that too. But my preference was, yes, to study things as they are, and to try to understand why it is that they are the way they are, as a step toward understanding how they might be changed.
Mm-hmm. And within political science, you chose international relations. Mm-hmm. Is the reason for that obvious, given what we've already discussed? Was it?
No, it isn't obvious, because you might, the same general argument that I've made so far could be applied to other parts of political science. I chose international relations, I think, because of personal background and personal involvement. Mm-hmm. If it hadn't been for my earlier life experiences, I probably would not have chosen international relations.
And interestingly enough, you chose to think about these issues as opposed to becoming active in politics about those issues. Can you explain that choice?
Sure. I love the ivory tower, and I don't have too much use for the real world. So I experienced the real world in the Army, and I said, well, that's the way it is. Okay, I survived fine. I did pretty well. That doesn't mean I want to repeat it. I would like to find myself a niche in which I would not have to do the kinds of things people in the real world have to do. Specifically, I didn't want to have to find a line of business where I have to compete with other businessmen in the same field. That didn't attract me in the least. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to go into government service either, because that meant taking orders from others, which I didn't feel like doing either. So I left academic life.
So what does it take to do political science?
What does it take to do political science?
Skills, virtues. I mean, somebody wants to do it. They better be alert to the fact that they have to.
Well, I don't think that the skills and virtues necessary for political science are different from other social sciences.
Right, okay. So what are they then?
They are, first of all, the ability to delay gratification. You don't get rewarded immediately for what you do. It requires the ability to achieve a certain amount of emotional independence from what other people think of you. Or in other words, in contemporary jargon, enough self-esteem so that you don't care too much what other people think of you. It requires the power, it requires unusual powers of concentration, else you don't get the work done. And it involves a sense of commitment to the life of the mind. If you haven't got that, you're going to be unhappy in the profession.
In your work, your students have been, and your relationship to them has been very important to you. I should note here that you've had 33 published dissertations have resulted from your collaboration with graduate students, and 23 unpublished, which were central to the careers of the writer. How have the students affected your work, and what did you get out of those relationships?
Well, that of course varied enormously from encounter to encounter and from student to student. Under the best of circumstances, we became close friends. This happened enough to make me feel very, very good about those relationships. In maybe 15–20% of these cases, the dissertations were good enough that they actually taught me something I didn't know before. This is not normally the case. You may pick up a little bit here and a little bit there, but it isn't very significant. Well, in 15–20% of the cases, I would say, I learned something significant, which is not bad, considering this business. Those are the good, positive things of which I'm proud and am terribly pleased with. Now there's another benefit which I want to make explicit, which is somewhat more instrumental in character. One of the responsibilities of a trainer of graduate students is not just to make as good an academic out of them as you can, but also to find them a job. Okay, the more students you train, the better they are, the better the jobs are that they're going to get placed in, the more extensive my network for then placing the next generation of students.
Mm-hmm. So it's a complex system.
It is a complex system.
That you wind up creating.
Right.
Now, in terms of what you then went about focusing on in your career, in a nutshell, your focus has been on communities beyond the nation state. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Basically?
That's right.
And again, what drew you to that? Is it all the things we've already discussed? Anything more beyond that? Was it the historical period when you emerged as a scholar that was important? This would have been you entered the job market, say, in the late 40s, maybe 1950?
I entered the job market in 51. I would put it a little differently. What attracted me to the one theme that sort of underlies everything I've done, that theme is the conditions under which the state as we understand it disappears, disintegrates, weakens, changes. Okay, why the interest in the state? Well, because I grew up under a system of an extraordinarily powerful state that victimized me. Mm-hmm. So my idea was, okay, how in the future do we get rid of states of that kind?
And so that was a problem that you were willing to devote your life to.
You were putting it very dramatically. I mean, I didn't sit down and say, look, Haas, you're going to devote your life to this. Yeah. It didn't quite happen that way. Right. But I mean, in retrospect, yes.
Mm-hmm. Now you, in the works that I've looked at, there is a notion of evolution as you look at societies. I want to apply that evolutionary notion to your ideas, basically. They have evolved over time,
oh, yes.
but one set of ideas grew into another. In the beginning, you worked on European integration, and you focused on a functional analysis of what was going on, and had insights about the way these regional communities evolved. But then, in a way, you backed away from that research. You didn't find that the evolution was going in the way you thought. And that actually took a little courage on your part, did it not? Or am I misstating it?
You're slightly misstating it. Yes, it started out the way you said. I picked European integration as my initial example. One, because I knew the languages, so it made it easy. Mm-hmm. Two, because at that time, the mid-1950s, it was the most highly developed instance, real-life instance, of movement away from the nation state. So it was a living laboratory, so to speak. All right, my first book came out of that, and 3 or 4 PhD dissertations. And then one of my then students, Philippe Schmitter, and I decided that why don't we try out the same theory outside of Europe. Mm-hmm. And he was a Latin American specialist, so we tried it out on what was then going on in Latin America, and concluded that the same theory applied to Latin America would predict the failure of regional community formation, which it did. I mean, the theory predicted correctly. All right, having accomplished that, what else? What was there to study? Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, let's try to find a case where the conditions that are found to be working in Europe for a successful transcending of the nation state, where can that be duplicated at the global level? Mm-hmm. So I picked a global organization affiliated with the United Nations, the International Labour Organization, which had an institutional structure which superficially resembled that of the then European community, and to study that. And that became my second major book. And the conclusion was the theory applied to regional integration will not work. Or if you apply it at the global level, it'll predict failure of further integration. That accomplished, I got bored with the subject. And I looked around for something else to do.
Right. And in a way, the latter part of your career is a kind of a focus on learning in international relations,
Right.
specifically in multilateral organizations. And how did you move to that way of conceptualizing the problem?
Well, that, with the benefit of hindsight, you could say, was implicit in what I was doing right along. Only I hadn't used that kind of language for it. Well, the emphasis on learning, which has preoccupied the last third of my career, I guess, grew out of a different interest, which was not part of the original interest of transnational community in transnational community formation. That new interest, and that's where the evolutionary argument comes in. That new interest was whether what you know as a political actor, the kind of knowledge you have in your head, whether that makes a difference in the kind of political decisions you make. And that's where science came in. The question I asked, or the hypothesis which I formulated, was if people think in terms, shall we say, analogous to scientific problem solving, they are more likely to hit on political formulas than otherwise that would have the result of undermining the nation state. That was the hypothesis I was working with. In my most recent book, I used the terms nationalism, liberalism, and progress. Okay, the notion of progress refers to what I've just described. Okay, so this led to a series of articles and books, of which the one on nationalism is just the most recent one, in which the gross answer to the hypothesis I've just stated is no. It doesn't work that way. Which led me to refine the hypothesis and ask, well, under what circumstances might certain kinds of knowledge make a difference? And refined in that way, I found some instances in which, yes, knowledge does make a difference. And when knowledge is power, tried to systematize what I learned, having redefined the hypothesis in that fashion.
And this is something that a social scientist has to do a lot, really, to bump his theories up against reality and change them if the reality doesn't match the hypothesis.
Well, that's the name of the game. I mean, the name of the game is, if you pardon the use of a cliche, is to push back the frontiers of knowledge. If one kind of push doesn't work, you got to try another kind of push.
Another kind of push. So you then began focusing on what you call epistemic communities.
Yes. Actually, my son invented the term.
Your son, who is also a political scientist, invented that term. And what are they, and why do they become a focal point for this kind of study?
Because they're carriers of scientific knowledge into politics. Epistemic communities are associations of professional experts in a particular field who, because of the knowledge they have an unusual influence on politicians and bureaucrats, are therefore able to penetrate government departments and make their ideas part of policy. That's an epistemic community. And they don't operate in all fields of policy. They only operate in fields of policy where science matters. In the field of human rights, forget it, there are no epistemic community. Science is irrelevant to that field. In environmental politics, it matters a great deal.
And also monetary and development.
Monetary.
And development policy.
Exactly.
Yeah. You say in your book, science, in short, influences the way the politics is done in these contexts we're talking about. Science becomes a component of politics because the scientific way of grasping reality is used to define the interests that political actors articulate and defend. The doing of actors can be described by observers as an exercise of defining and realizing interests informed by changing scientific knowledge about man and nature.
Did I say that?
Yes.
Pretty good.
Page 11 in your book on nationalism.
Pretty good.
That's right. So, but this suggests to me that you remain something of a Weberian?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Weber is the single most vital intellectual influence on my thinking.
And why is that?
I can't give you a really good answer to that one. It's just because the short answer is that I resonate to the way he thinks. Mm-hmm. Why do I resonate to the way he thinks? I don't know myself. Mm-hmm. It's just that, if you allow me the use of a technical term here, is that in terms of the ontological commitments that he made, of which I only became aware gradually as I matured, I found out that mine were the same as his.
Mm-hmm. You in the beginning of your book, you say, I take my stand with Max Weber. Interest, material and ideal, not ideas directly determine man's action. But the worldviews which were created by ideas have very often acted as the switches and channeled the dynamics of interest.
Yeah, that's Weber.
Right.
And I buy that.
Yeah. And it's essentially a summary of the way you've tried to think about ideas, scientific ideas, and their relation to international politics.
Exactly.
Now this is a world in which the focus is not on political heroes, on great men changing the world.
That's right.
How do you account for that? That epistemological choice.
That epistemological choice was a self-conscious one. To explain events by saying that some big shot pushed all the right buttons at the right time is much too easy. Because the great majority of events of which history is made up, you cannot account for by some big shot having pushed the right buttons. And to use the exceptional as the normal is not scientific procedure.
And so the emphasis then becomes on looking at the actual work of international organizations.
Yes.
And how those organizations are impacted by new scientific ideas.
Yes.
Yeah. Now let's
Well,
talk.
how they're impacted by any ideas,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Including scientific ideas. I'm not just looking at scientific ideas.
No, right. But how do men and women begin to think about cause and effect?
Exactly.
Yeah. In the worlds that they're dealing with.
You got
it. Give us a specific example with regard to environment or monetary policy where this has played out.
Right. In the field of the environment, the notion that the pattern of consumption of fuels based on coal and oil could make a difference to the kind of lives we lead, not in the sense of oil prices going up or down, but in the sense of what kind of air do we breathe, what kind of resources will be available 100, 200, 500 years from now. This kind of long-range thinking, which is barely 10 years old, as far as international politics is concerned. It's older than that in scientific circles. But as a political principle, that resource management and resource exhaustion, particularly with respect to non-renewable fuels, sources of fuels, that this is something to be taken very seriously. It's a very recent thing. And it's based entirely on something that a bunch of scientists preached, which at first was rejected by governments, which is still being rejected by a lot of governments, particularly in late developing countries, because they do not wish to make the adjustments that are necessary to go from oil-burning industries to industries based on some other source of energy.
So, further your analysis here, what are the dynamics as these subtle scientific points penetrate the system?
The dynamics are, first of all, enough politicians have to believe that the cause of some undesirable event is the cause the scientists say it is. Scientists claim, well, the reason there's global warming is because of the kind of fuel we burn. Okay, you've got to believe that, first of all. Now, there's an awful lot of them who did not believe it, and there's still a lot who don't believe it. But a critical mass of people who accepted the accuracy of this physical-chemical analysis that had to come about first. Took a while. All right, that's just step number one. Step number two is you then have to have enough allies in the body politic that subscribe to this principle to exert pressure on political parties and bureaucracies to do the proper policy things that ought to be done in order to reduce dependence on fossil fuels. And eventually you've got to persuade heads of governments to subscribe to international agreements, to negotiate and subscribe to international agreements that try to regulate this. That happened after 1992.
And why is this first phase so critical? That is where the epistemic communities actually touch base in the bureaucracy.
Well, because no one, or very few people, practical politicians or bureaucrats that are busy doing what they're doing, would take the time to educate themselves, unless pushed that way by somebody else, to learn the lessons that are necessary before the change in policy becomes something to be envisaged.
You write, and again I'm quoting you, I hold that human collectivities are able to learn to change their institutions and practices to make things better for themselves. And I hold that this learning occurs by humankind's thinking analytically and searching for causal patterns, causal patterns, modes of thinking associated with the Enlightenment.
Right. That's it.
And that's really the standard that you bring to your study of nationalism. Is that correct?
No.
Okay.
That's not correct.
Okay.
The way I study nationalism involves phases, historical phases. First, how come a given country becomes a nation? Right? They're not born nations. It happens. What's the process through which a given body of people decide to call themselves a nation? Right? Well, the historical patterns, standard historical patterns that explain this, and one part of my new book explores these patterns. That's step one. How does a country become a nation state? Second question: which body of beliefs will gain victory in that country and shape the beliefs of all, or at least most, of the people who live in it? What's the content of that body of beliefs? Well, there's 7 or 8 different belief systems that have all had the function of unifying countries as nation states. All right. Third question: what kind of trouble will those beliefs lead the country into? Wars, rebellions, secessions, depressions, you name it. Fourth question: what lessons do the members of that country derive from the deep doo-doo they got themselves into as a result of their beliefs? That's where the learning comes in. What inferences do they draw from that? In what way do they change their mode of thinking? And one of the ways in which they can change their mode of thinking, is come to the conclusion, who needs a nation state anyway?
And for you, is that an ideal?
You know, I'm ambivalent about that. I don't think the nation state is necessarily a bad thing. It depends on what kind of nation state you're talking about. They're not all equally good or equally bad. And to say flatly, get rid of the nation state and supplant it with something else, I don't want to go that far.
You're writing now about this world around us today, and you say the vessel of sovereign statehood is leaky. The pumps.
Not my words.
Oh,
Stanley Hoffman.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. Okay. I missed that. Okay. Well, you subscribe to these views of Stanley Hoffman. The pumps still work from time to time, but not consistently. The captain is not sure whether to beach the vessel or to join a fleet of similarly damaged ships sailing under negotiated orders. International organizations merely reflect these uncertainties. Interdependence cannot be managed unless the most important captains experience turbulence in similar ways and draw similar inferences. So in a way, that's where hope lies, not in the sense that multilateralism is the ideal necessarily, but in terms of dealing with those problems that require a multilateral solution.
Exactly.
Right.
I agree with every word you said, particularly the ones where you quote me.
Okay, even when I misquote the source, that's right.
No, the vessel of sovereignty leaks was Hoffman's phrase.
Okay.
The rest of it was mine.
Oh, okay, all right, just that initial phrase, but not the, that's what I thought. So you said, let's talk about one other thing here, which is you said that these insights on learning don't apply to something like human rights and the struggle for human rights. How would you assess what's going on there? What is the conceptual framework by which you see this dispersal of human rights, or do you see that? Am I presuming something?
It depends whether you ask me on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday.
I see.
I'm unsure of what, in my own perceptions. There is no doubt that there is a much greater, almost, but not quite universal concern with human rights now as compared to 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. No question about that. Whether this will result eventually in a uniform global culture of respect for the same human rights, I'm not at all sure about that. And on that, I disagree with the many advocacy organizations who are active in the field of human rights. One of the reasons why I use science or scientific knowledge as a conceptual anchor for thinking about international politics is because of the universality of science. Scientific reasoning is universal. If you're going to do science, there's only one way to do it. And nobody really disputes that. Therefore, at least hypothetically, there's some justification for thinking that any kind of different thought about causality that has some degree of kinship to scientific reasoning has a greater chance for being truly universal than a body of reasoning which is not by definition universal. Okay, thinking about human rights is not by definition universal. I mean, it's a Western way of thinking which has penetrated the non-Western world very unevenly. And whether it will continue to penetrate it is an open question and not assured as far as I'm concerned.
Now, at the beginning of this interview, you explained to us why you loved and gravitated toward the ivory tower. I'm here, I want to ask you an age-old question in the social sciences and in political sciences, the relation between theory and practice. And I guess I'm being left with the conclusion that you found a unique handle on that problem in the sense of your focus on the role of science and scientific thinking on political life. Is that fair?
Yes, that's fair.
Would you like to comment on that proposition?
Let me comment by offering a word of caution. I would be very foolish to project my evolutionary penchant if I said it is all but assured that this mode of thinking is going to spread out by invisible but nevertheless real ripples to take in the whole world.
The scientific mode.
The scientific mode. I'm not sure that's true. And I can imagine and I can see evidence of contrary trends. And I think it would be quite foolish to go out on a limb and say the way Fukuyama did it, for example. Say, this way of doing things has triumphed, period.
There is a continuing tension in the body of your work, which one of your students focused on, Jack Donnelly, in the recent conference, namely your search for the ideal mixed with a pragmatic sense of what can actually be accomplished in the real world.
That's very fair. I guess that's what I was trying to say in this peroration I just wished on you.
Okay, so how would you suggest that students prepare for the future? What should they study?
Computer science.
In that world, will everything be automated? So therefore, we will have to deal less with the frailty of man?
Both you and I don't believe that, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Neither of us does. What should students study? I don't have any words of wisdom to offer on that.
Okay.
Students should study whatever turns them on.
Okay, then let's try another one. You identify liberalism, democracy, and human dignity with progress. But I detect in your writing a sense of the limits of action and the complexity of broad historical processes. So how does the individual make a difference in the realization of values that move us beyond the nation state?
Any individual. I mean, you're not talking about particular.
Yeah.
Let me creep up on that one by telling you some stories about what's been happening in Western Europe in the last 40 years on a rather massive scale. Until World War II, it was quite common for, if you asked a German, whom you despise most, after saying Jews, they would say Russians, and after Russians, they would say our hereditary enemy is France, because we've always fought the French, and until we get rid of them, we'll never have peace. If you ask the same question of the French, they would give you exactly the same answer in reverse. You ask that question today, nobody's going to give you that answer. Germans take the French for granted, French take the Germans for granted. They study each other's language. More Frenchmen now study German than not as many as study English. But right after English, which they never used to do before, they trade with each other at an unprecedented rate. They invest in each other's companies at an unprecedented rate. They take each other for granted as never again fighting a war against each other. The notion that another war between France and Germany is conceivable, it is not conceivable any longer. It's gone. Okay? How did this happen? It happened, one, because the Germans were taught a lesson in 1945, which is to wage aggressive wars to commit suicide. They came pretty damn close to that. The French technically won that war, but they didn't really win, right? We rescued them, and they learned that lesson. In other words, the lesson that World War II taught those broad populations. I'm not talking about intellectuals.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Broad population is that they have to learn to live with each other. Mm-hmm. And they did.
Mm-hmm. And so the individual then matters as part of these kinds of global processes?
Well, I didn't tell you the second part of the story. Mm-hmm. Add to this a second factor. Then came along the political project of creating a united Europe, which had the result of creating a myriad of institutions in which very, very many people participated, as business people, as labor leaders, as consumers, as tourists that crossed the border. These institutions developed a permanence through which both French and German, and you can escalate this to other Europeans, I just use French and Germans as my example here, learned to do routine business with each other every day on problems which they experienced as common problems. Taken these two, first comes the traumatic lesson. Then comes the institution for learning to deal with each other. The very things, if you like, that have not happened in the Middle East.
And so there is hope, if one's perspective is a long-term one.
Yes.
Ernie, on that note, I want to thank you very much for being with us today, sharing with us the story of your life and the ideas that have really mattered to you.
Thank you, Harry.
Thank you. And thank you very much for joining us for this conversation with history.